In June 2026, I mean, a webcomic didn't just end its story, it practically broke the entire internet.
Oh, absolutely shattered it.
Right. It split this massive global fandom right down the middle over a really profoundly uncomfortable question, like, what are we actually willing to forgive?
Yeah, we are talking about Jinx,
Yeah.
the massive cultural phenomenon, that dark psychological boys love manhwa by the creator Mingwa.
Yeah.
And, I mean, when Chapter 102 finally dropped and wrapped up the main story, the internet discourse was just, it was nothing short of explosive.
Fiery, intense, like incredibly divisive.
Oh,
People
yeah.
were arguing over, toxic relationships, the nature of redemption, and honestly how we interact with the media we consume.
Mhm.
So our mission for this deep dive is to sort of unpack the psychology, the systemic power dynamics, and the incredibly calculated visual storytelling that kept millions of readers completely unable to look away.
Whether they loved how it ended or, absolutely hated it.
Exactly.
But before we get into the actual mechanics of this story, we really need to establish a very clear baseline for you listening.
Yeah, good call.
Because this deep dive covers mature, highly intense source material. The narrative centers heavily on emotional abuse, financial coercion, trauma bonding, and psychological manipulation.
Right.
So to be absolutely clear, we are impartially analyzing the text and the cultural discourse surrounding it. We're dissecting the mechanics of the fiction, not endorsing the controversial or, harmful viewpoints depicted within it.
Right, exactly. We're just looking at the art and the reaction. And for you listening, even if you have never read a webtoon in your life or don't even know what the medium entails, stick around.
Yeah, you don't need to be an expert.
Because this is a fascinating masterclass in how media explores the absolute darkest sides of human connection.
Mm.
It's an exploration of why audiences are just so drawn to characters who, at first glance, seem completely unredeemable.
It really is. I mean, the series operates as an intricate study in psychological tension.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this. To understand why Jinx is so polarizing, we really have to look at the trap that starts the whole thing. Because the story, it does not start as a romance.
Not at all.
It doesn't even have the framework of a romance. It starts as this brutal, calculated survival mechanism.
Yeah, and to understand that survival mechanism, we have to look at the protagonist, Kim Dan. He is a 29-year-old physical therapist who is essentially drowning.
Yeah.
He is being crushed by what we can only call catastrophic generational debt.
And he didn't even rack up this debt himself.
Right,
It
exactly.
was left behind by a deadbeat father. So Dan is actively being hunted by violent, illegal loan sharks. Like, they show up at his work, they trash his apartment.
It's terrifying.
It is. And on top of that, his former employer unjustly blacklisted him, making it basically impossible to find legitimate work. Meanwhile, he is desperately trying to keep his ailing grandmother alive and pay her skyrocketing, just astronomical hospital bills. The guy is scraping the absolute bottom of the barrel.
He really is. And that constant, unending pressure leads him into a profound psychological state known as learned helplessness.
Right.
He has been conditioned by this hostile environment to believe he has zero power to alter his circumstance. When you are hit with crisis after crisis and no solution works, your brain eventually rewires itself to just stop trying to escape.
That's so bleak.
It is. Dan values his own life, his body, and his personal well-being at absolute zero. If he can suffer just to secure a hospital bed for his grandmother, his mind rationalizes that as a completely fair, logical trade.
And into this desperate drowning situation steps Jaekyung.
Yep.
He is 27 years old, absurdly wealthy, hypermasculine, and the undefeated MMA champion of the world. And Jaekyung offers Dan a contract to be his personal physical therapist, but it comes with a deeply disturbing catch.
Right, so Jaekyung harbors this strict superstition, the titular Jinx. He genuinely believes that to guarantee a victory in the MMA cage, he must have a highly satisfying, physically dominating sexual encounter the night before a fight. So he offers Dan an exorbitant sum, like 5 million won per session, to fulfill this specific coercive role.
5 million won. I mean, when you are starving and the person you love most in the world is dying in a hospital bed, it's like someone offering you a life preserver in the middle of a hurricane, but only if you sign away your soul.
Exactly.
You aren't really consenting to the terms, you're just trying not to drown.
What's fascinating here is how the source material explicitly highlights the illusion of choice.
Yeah.
The narrative serves as a harsh, unyielding critique of systemic capitalism. It demonstrates that true ethical consent simply cannot exist when the alternative to saying no is physical violence from loan sharks or the actual death of a family member.
Right.
It is pure financial coercion masquerading as a mutual agreement.
I have to admit, reading through some of these earlier chapters, I felt incredibly frustrated with Dan.
Oh, for sure. That's common.
Right. There are moments where Jaekyung leaves the door wide open, metaphorically and literally. Dan could walk away. He could go to the police about the loan sharks. By staying and just absorbing this horrific treatment, it feels like weakness. It almost feels like he is complicit in his own destruction.
Well, that frustration is a very common, very human reaction from the audience.
Yeah.
We want the victims in our media to be fighters who bite back.
Exactly. We want them to stand up for themselves.
But that expectation fundamentally ignores the bleak neurological reality of trauma bonding and systemic poverty.
How so?
Well, the police cannot realistically protect him from an underground crime syndicate 24 hours a day, nor can they pay his grandmother's medical bills.
Right, that makes sense.
So we shouldn't mistake Dan's learned helplessness for weakness. In reality, Dan possesses an incredible, quiet internal resilience. He endures this because he is executing a long game of survival.
He's trying to outlast it.
Exactly. He is preserving the only thing he has left, his grandmother's life. His character arc isn't about suddenly gaining physical strength. It's a slow, agonizing psychological journey toward reclaiming his bodily autonomy from a system designed to strip it away.
It's incredibly ironic, though. I mean, Jaekyung projects this untouchable, hypermasculine image in a brutal sport, but this Jinx proves he's actually paralyzed by anxiety.
Oh, completely paralyzed.
He's using Dan as a human stress ball to manage his own insecurities, which forces us to ask why he insists on this specific cruel dynamic. Isn't he just an arrogant jerk hiding behind a tragic backstory?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of clinical psychology, Jaekyung's behavior is a textbook demonstration of the dismissive avoidant attachment style.
Okay.
He wasn't just born with a desire to inflict cruelty. His worldview was forged by profound childhood trauma. He was abandoned by his parents and raised by a highly violent, drug-addicted father.
So think of his emotional state like a fortress under permanent siege.
Yeah.
He was hurt so badly as a kid that he genuinely believes if he ever sticks his neck out and shows a soft emotion, someone is going to chop it off. So he preemptively turns everything into a cold, ruthless business transaction.
Exactly. And growing up in that volatile environment left him with a severe psychological aversion to any intoxicating substances or anything that alters the mind.
No drinking, no drugs.
None. He avoids them completely because he associates them with his father's chaos and weakness. He demands total, absolute clarity at all times.
Right.
And more importantly, it instilled an obsessive need for absolute control over his environment and the people in it. He equates vulnerability with submission.
He views every relationship as a zero-sum game. Like if he buys Dan's compliance, he holds all the leverage.
Exactly.
He can't be emotionally hurt or betrayed if the entire dynamic is just a signed business deal.
And this extreme need for control is the actual mechanism behind the Jinx. The Jinx is not a magical spell or a supernatural curse.
Right, it's not magic.
It is an obsessive-compulsive coping mechanism. The MMA cage is inherently chaotic. An opponent could land a lucky strike, an injury could happen in a split second.
Anything could go wrong.
Right, so by convincing himself that he must sexually dominate someone before a fight to win, he takes the massive, unpredictable terror of losing his status and shifts it onto a highly controllable, rigid ritual.
So he strips Dan of his humanity because acknowledging him as a person would require empathy, and empathy would shatter the emotional armor Jaekyung relies on to survive.
What's fascinating here is how the hypermasculine MMA subculture actually rewards this exact emotional suppression.
Oh, totally.
The industry he thrives in praises aggression, emotional detachment, and dominance. He essentially weaponizes his toxic traits because his entire professional environment validates that behavior as the hallmark of a true champion.
Yeah.
He uses his physical stature and his vast wealth to keep Dan permanently pinned beneath him, ensuring Dan remains dependent while never getting close enough to see the internal scars.
But that brings up a glaring question. If this dynamic is so deeply toxic, so steeped in coercion and emotional suppression, why did millions of people eagerly tune in 3 times a month to read it?
It's a great question.
Because it sounds like a miserable experience. But the hook, the reason people couldn't look away, actually lies in the visual storytelling. Mingwa's art is phenomenal, and it is highly, highly calculated to manipulate the reader.
Oh, the art itself operates as a silent, subtextual storyteller. It specifically utilizes extreme proportional contrast to dictate the power dynamic before a single word is read.
Yeah, talk about that contrast.
Well, Mingwa consistently draws Jaekyung as massive and hypermuscular, with exaggerated broad shoulders and sharp, aggressive geometric lines. He literally consumes the panel space, pushing the boundaries of the frame.
While Dan is drawn as slender, fragile, constructed with soft, rounded lines, when you put them in the same panel, the visual size difference is staggering.
It really is.
Jaekyung physically towers over him. The art itself physically traps Dan. You feel claustrophobic just looking at the layout. So the art itself is basically playing a psychological trick on the reader.
Yes. And beyond the proportions, there is the meticulous use of the gaze.
Right.
Throughout the first season, Jaekyung is almost exclusively depicted looking down at Dan. His eyes are often heavily shadowed, intense, and predatory. It communicates absolute ownership and surveillance.
Yeah.
Conversely, Dan is constantly drawn with downcast eyes, or his face is entirely obscured behind his bangs. It is a brilliant visual representation of shame, avoidance, and the desire to become invisible.
And the color grading reinforces the entire psychological landscape.
Oh, the killers are huge.
Jaekyung's MMA world is rendered in cold, sharp fluorescent lights, stark whites, and metallic tones. It feels clinical and ruthless, but whenever we see Dan's impoverished life, his cramped apartment, the hospital rooms, the palette shifts to muted, murky, desaturated colors. It broadcasts this heavy, chronic exhaustion.
And this raises an important point about aesthetic manipulation in media. Critics rightfully point out that the phenomenal artwork effectively gaslights the audience.
How so?
Well, the characters are drawn to be incredibly conventionally attractive. The kinetic fight choreography utilizes complex three-point perspectives and heavy motion blur that makes the violence look breathtakingly dynamic.
Yeah, let's go.
Exactly. And because the presentation is so visually stunning, readers are subconsciously tricked into romanticizing a deeply harmful relationship. The visual beauty acts as an anesthetic, masking the brutality of the abuse.
It makes the toxic pill significantly easier to swallow. You find yourself rooting for characters simply because they look good doing terrible things.
Exactly.
But you can only mask a rotten foundation with pretty wallpaper for so long.
Yeah.
Eventually, the structural damage is going to cause a collapse. How does the creator visually and narratively signal the moment this power dynamic finally breaks?
Well, that narrative snapping point happens during what the fandom called the hospital crisis.
Right.
This represents the definitive shift in the manhwa's structure, moving from Season 1, which centers entirely on coercion, to Season 2, which focuses on deconstruction.
Because Dan's grandmother, his entire reason for enduring this grueling, humiliating contract, the person he loves most in the world, takes a turn for the worse and is actively dying.
Yeah.
Dan is emotionally raw. He is terrified, shattered, and desperate for just a shred of basic human empathy from a man he has been intimately tethered to for months.
And faced with Dan's intense, overwhelming grief, Jaekyung's avoidant attachment style triggers a massive psychological defense mechanism.
He just can't handle it.
No, he cannot handle the emotional weight of Dan's sorrow, so he dismisses it entirely. He has a title fight coming up, so he demands the Jinx ritual anyway, completely ignoring the context of the situation.
That is so cold.
It is. Jaekyung's internal logic assumes that because he paid for the expensive VIP hospital room, he has literally purchased the right to ignore Dan's tears, treating human grief as a minor contractual annoyance.
This is the pivot. This is the exact moment Dan's learned helplessness morphs into complete, chilling emotional numbness.
Yes.
The mechanism of trauma bonding shatters. Dan looks at Jaekyung and finally truly realizes that no matter how much he gives, no matter how much he suffers, Jaekyung will never see him as a human being. So, Dan completely shuts down. He packs his few belongings, leaves the leftover contract money behind, and just vanishes into the city.
And that sudden, unexpected disappearance shatters Jaekyung's reality. Dan completely vanishes. Jaekyung's dismissive, avoidant coping mechanisms implode. He assumed money was an infallible tether.
Right. Jaekyung initially tries to brush it off. He thinks, oh, he'll be back when he runs out of cash. But days pass and Dan doesn't come back.
He doesn't.
And without Dan, Jaekyung's Jinx, that rigid control mechanism we talked about, turns against him. His performance in the ring tanks, he becomes erratic, chronically exhausted, and wildly violent with his sparring partners.
He falls apart.
Exactly. Finally, he tracks Dan down to this bleak, low-income transit hub. And here's where it gets really interesting. Jaekyung tries to use his wealth like a cheat code he's relied on his whole life to bypass human connection. He tries to punch in the code, but he suddenly realizes the game has been patched. The code doesn't work anymore.
It is a stunning, deeply satisfying reversal of power.
Yeah.
Jaekyung confronts Dan at the station and attempts to negotiate. He offers a blank check, a substantially higher salary, and dramatically better living standards.
Just throwing money at the problem.
Exactly. But Dan looks at the money with absolute cold indifference. He quietly but firmly rejects the offer. And how he enforces this boundary is crucial. He doesn't yell or throw a punch.
No, he just doesn't care.
Right. His apathy is what hurts the most. Jaekyung's wealth, his ultimate, infallible weapon, fails completely against someone who has fundamentally decided their basic human dignity is no longer for sale at any price.
It completely strips Jaekyung of his pride. He has nothing else to offer.
It forces an absolute internal collapse. He is forced to confront the horrifying fact that his billions are entirely useless. This thrusts him into a brutal chasing arc where he must painstakingly unlearn his transactional habits and figure out how to communicate like a vulnerable human being.
And Jaekyung doesn't exist in a vacuum either. When his wealth stops working on Dan, his entire public facade crumbles, and the people around him have a front row seat to this meltdown.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about how the supporting characters react to seeing the untouchable champion fall apart. Guys like the junior fighter, Potato Yoongu, or that smug actor Choi Hee-sum.
Well, Yoongu idolized Jaekyung as an unshakable, flawless machine. Seeing his hero haggard, desperate, and failing in the gym shatters that illusion entirely.
Yeah.
Yoongu innocently tries to help bridge the gap between the two men, representing the audience's desire for reconciliation. But Hee-sung, the actor who previously treated Dan with genuine kindness, acts as a sharp narrative foil.
Oh, Hee-sung loved it.
He did. Hee-sung reacts to Jaekyung's collapse with this quiet, vindicated smugness. He actively mocks Jaekyung's severe lack of emotional maturity. Hee-sung forces the champion to face the uncomfortable truth that money cannot buy genuine affection, rubbing salt in the wound of Jaekyung's massive ego.
So Jaekyung is brought to his knees, and he's forced to rebuild himself from the ground up. But did he actually earn his forgiveness by the time the story concluded in June 2026? Because the way the narrative handles this redemption is the exact debate that tore the fandom apart.
The finale in Chapter 102 attempts to give us the ultimate resolution to this psychological warfare. Jaekyung fights for his championship title, and crucially, he reclaims it without using the Jinx ritual beforehand.
Wait, really? Explain how monumental that is for his character. How does he actually break that dependency?
He breaks it by enduring the sheer terror of stepping into the cage clean. He willingly removes his psychological safety net. By fighting without the ritual, he exposes himself to the chaotic unpredictability of the sport he fears so much.
That's a massive leap for him.
It is. When he wins through sheer raw talent and determination, he permanently severs the mental link between sexual dominance and professional success. He proves to his own fractured psyche that his victories are tied to his own innate skill, not the exploitation and degradation of Kim Dan.
So he faces his deepest childhood terror of losing, and he does it completely vulnerable. Meanwhile, Dan sets ironclad personal boundaries.
Right.
He doesn't just fold back into Jaekyung's lavish lifestyle. He refuses any financial support that resembles their old toxic contract. He maintains his own separate identity and agency. They eventually unite by mutual, uncoerced choice, culminating in a peaceful domestic time skip.
Yep.
But the reaction to this ending was incredibly polarized. The mainstream fans on platforms like TikTok and X, they absolutely loved it.
They did. They found immense emotional catharsis in the resolution. For fans who stuck by the grueling, dark series for years, seeing the ultimate red flag reduced to absolute tears, doing the emotional labor, and then eventually going on aggressively normal dates like riding a Ferris wheel was incredibly satisfying.
Yeah, they just wanted them to be happy.
Exactly. They were thrilled that Dan finally achieved safety and that genuine love conquered the toxic superstition.
But the critical reviewers, the ones dissecting the chapters on Reddit and specialized analytical forums, heavily condemned the finale.
Very much so.
They pointed out a severe, glaring pacing disparity. You have 50-plus chapters of intense, excruciating emotional and financial abuse, but the healing, the groveling, and the actual forgiveness are compressed into a rapid, multi-chapter time skip.
The critics called it the illusion of accountability.
Right.
The mechanism of his redemption felt hollow to many analytical readers. Because while Jaekyung certainly cried and suffered emotionally for a brief period during the chasing arc, he ultimately kept everything.
He really did.
He kept his immense wealth, his societal prestige, his championship belt, and his systemic power. His elite status remained entirely untouched. Critics felt the narrative utilized quick shortcuts to force a palatable happy ending without giving the characters adequate, realistic space to fundamentally reconstruct such a severely damaged dynamic.
There's a fascinating cultural split in how the story was digested, too.
Definitely. Korean fans and Eastern audiences tended to focus heavily on the grim realism of the crushing debt system and the brutal realities of the MMA subculture.
Yeah.
They generally accepted the dark, coercive psychological mechanics of the story as part of the established genre conventions of a dark boys' love manhwa. But Western audiences heavily debated the strict boundaries of consent, the necessity of trigger warnings, and the real-world ethics of romanticizing such a profound power imbalance.
Which is completely understandable.
Absolutely. There's intense, sustained backlash to specific scenes, particularly the deeply uncomfortable public shower encounter early in the series, which many Western readers felt crossed an unforgivable line.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I mean, is this a story about a deeply flawed man genuinely changing his entire worldview for love? Or is it a story about an exhausted victim giving up too easily and settling for a slightly reformed abuser?
Well, that ambiguity is the core tension of the work, and likely why it will be discussed for years to come.
Right.
While the criticisms about the rush pacing are highly valid, the healing arc was undeniably too compressed for the amount of trauma inflicted. We have to look at the story's overarching thematic achievement.
Okay, what's the takeaway?
The narrative successfully, powerfully argues that a healthy relationship simply cannot be built on an imbalance of power. It proves that true intimacy cannot be purchased, coerced, or bullied into existence.
Yeah.
It requires the complete demolition of that original capitalist contract. It demands a perfectly level playing field where the victim reclaims total bodily and financial autonomy, and the abuser willingly surrenders their structural leverage.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with a bleak contract built on extreme capitalist coercion, unpacked the painful, necessary psychological deconstruction of an alpha male, and saw how breathtaking but manipulative visual art can make us root for the impossible.
It really stands as a testament to how media, even in its darkest, most controversial genres, can force us to confront the complex mechanics of survival, the deep scars of trauma, and what it really truly takes to achieve genuine redemption.
Which brings us right back to where we started, to the divided internet and the debates that are still raging across social media. The story asks something very uncomfortable of us as an audience, and I want to leave you with a fascinating question pulled directly from the fandom's own community posts. If Jaekyung had been poor and physically unattractive, would readers have forgiven him so easily?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Right. How much do beauty, success, and sheer charisma influence our own willingness to forgive incredibly harmful behavior in the media we consume? And maybe, just maybe, in real life.
That is a profound question to ponder as we consider the subtle ways our own perceptions are manipulated by the stories we are drawn to.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning what you read and always keep looking beyond the frame.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. See you in the next one.